Hi everyone, I'm Samantha and I'm going to be guiding you through a little bit of cooking today. We've got some preparing and some cooking. We're going to do a couple of sweet treats. I was asked for something sweet and Christmassy, and I don't really do the traditional sort of Christmas things like Christmas cake and cookies and that sort of thing, because I like to kind of prioritize healthy stuff and yeah, pretty much that's the reason. Like, I don't really go by the standard recipe. So I wanted to bring something nice and healthy and easy that you could add to like your repertoire for any time, but you could totally make for like a Christmas treat. Especially being that Christmas is usually the time that we tend to overindulge and have all of the things, and it can be easy to kind of push past your limits. It's nice to have like a sweet treat option that you could make for yourself or for taking to an event or something like that, that is like a bit lower on sugar and that sort of thing. Especially fun with the desserts as well. Once you've had the big Christmas lunch and it's hot, it's Australia, it's summer, you got to have like just dessert or something, and it can just be like so heavy if it's too sweet or if it's heavy like cake. So I wanted to show you how to make a raw cake. It's vegan as well, so the good thing about that, and gluten-free, so like pretty much everyone can eat it. Obviously there's, you know, always some dietary requirements that might not fit in, but you know, pretty much everyone can eat it, and it's really nice and light, and I think really summery. And the other really good thing about it is that it's really adaptable. So you can use the recipe base and then you can just totally change it up. You can add flavors to it and play around with it. You can mix things through it, that sort of thing. So I wanted to share with you that one. And then the other one I was going to share are some ginger cookies. So again, wanted to just bring a healthy take on like a sweet treat on a cookie. And this one's a really simple, what is it? 3 ingredients, plus the other little bits and pieces. But yeah, mainly just a couple of ingredients for some little ginger flavored spiced ginger peanut butter cookies, and you can play around with that too. So I always like to share things that are adaptable depending on what you've got at home, and simple, less ingredients and that sort of thing. So yeah, that's what I'm going to bring today. So you will need a blender, like an actual liquidy blender is ideal for the raw cake, and that is to get it nice and smooth. So if you have a food processor, that's all you have, you can totally use that. It's just not going to be as creamy smooth. But if you have like a drinks blender, then that will be better for this recipe. Or a stick blender would work really well too. We're just aiming to get it as smooth as possible. The base, you can use, food processor is good for the base, but if you have a blender, you can work around just using it for both. That's what I'm going to do today. And then for the cookies, we don't really need anything except for a bowl and a spatula and the oven to cook them in. So yeah, we'll go through that as we get further along, but we'll start with the raw cake. So for the raw cake, we're going to do an almond and coconut crust, and then it's going to be like a cheesecake, a vegan cheesecake filling. So it's a raw vegan cheesecake. It's just a base recipe. I've put in here that we're going to use limes and zest of limes. I actually ended up I wanted to use the lemon that I had instead of limes, because I'm actually going to serve mine when I eat it with some fresh peaches, which are in season right now because it's Christmas time and stone fruit is in season. And I'm actually going to do some basil with mine, but because that's what I saw at the markets today. So the whole idea is that you can do this really simple plain base, and then you could serve it with whatever seasonal Christmas fruit is available, like cherries, and you could put some of that into it, or you could just serve it on top and make like a little sauce or something like that. So that's what I wanted to do today, and I guess just show you the base and then encourage you to be flexible about what flavors you wanted to throw into it. So we're going to make the base recipe, and then as we make it, I'm going to talk you through how you can flavor it up in different ways. So yeah, let's get started. So to make the raw cake, what we're going to do is we're going to be freezing it. or setting it in the fridge. So it's good to set in the fridge or freezer. Freezer's going to be a bit quicker. It's best to make this like the night before, or at least like 3 or 4 hours or something before you're going to go and take it somewhere, ideally, because it does take a while to set. And the great thing about this recipe is that you can just keep it frozen. So if you ever have raw cakes at cafes and shops and that sort of thing, that they will actually usually be frozen and stored frozen, and then they will just be pulled out when they're going to be like served in the next couple of days. So you can make a raw cake and just leave it in the freezer. You can leave it in the freezer whole and then pull it out whenever you need it. So you can make it in advance, which is great, because usually with a cake, you've got to like make it the day before and keep it all fresh and all that sort of thing. So you can do that. The other really good thing about it is you can make it in advance, and then you can like cut it up and portion it up and keep little sweet treats in the fridge that are going to be like healthy little study treats when you're wanting to like motivate and reward yourself, and having a yummy little treat when you're in full study mode, and keep it kind of healthy and light too. So that was another reason I wanted to share this with you. So it does say to use a springform tin. That's really good. I don't have one, so I'm going to use a loaf tin. When you're baking like cooked cakes and stuff, that stuff matters a bit more, because it is going to affect the cooking time and the texture of the cake. If it's a dense cake and you use a loaf but it's supposed to be like that, then it's going to take longer to cook, and it might not cook through in the time that you're given, that sort of thing. With this kind of recipe, it really doesn't matter. It just means that it's going to be thicker on the base, and then thicker on the top, because it's not as wide of a circumference as the tin. So it doesn't matter. And you can serve it in thinner slices, whatever you want. So it doesn't really matter what you're setting it in, but I'm going to use that. I quite like cutting little high slivers as well. So that's what I'm going to use today. Now for the base, we're going to use some medjool dates. So they're what they call medjool dates. They're described as soft dates. So they are really squishy. You find them in the fresh food section of the supermarket, rather than on the shelves. You can just use the dried dates that are on the shelves. They're just a little bit drier. So when you blend them up, you would want to like add a little bit of liquid water or more coconut oil or something like that, just to get it to all stick together. So coconut oil is probably the best way to go for that. But so these are a little bit more expensive. So if you can't afford medjool dates, that's okay. Just use the dates off the shelf and they'll be totally fine. Just make sure you get the pits out of them. For the base, we're also going to use some nuts. So it says on the ingredients here to use slivered almonds, blanched slivered almonds. I'm changing some things up a bit to show you that you don't have to use one fixed ingredient. I'll tell you what we're going to use, and then I'm going to tell you how you could change it up if you had something different. So I'm going to use almonds today for the base as well. So you want something sticky and sweet, and then you want something crunchy. And then we're going to use a bit of shredded coconut as well. That's really good because it bulks it up. And yeah, I'm using like shredded or the shaved one rather than desiccated, because it's got a bit more texture. So yeah, definitely if you have the option, just use one of the chunkier ones rather than desiccated coconut. And that adds more texture and kind of a lightness. It's a bit less dense than nuts, but you can absolutely just do it with sort of dates and nuts. And then the other thing we're going to put in to bind it all together is the coconut oil. So just need a tiny bit of that. And we don't need any extra sweetener in the base because the dates are what's bringing the sweetness. And then we've got the coconut oil to stick it all together and to help it set, because coconut oil, as you can see, is solid at room temperature unless it's really, really hot. But generally, if it's coming out of the fridge, it's going to be solid. So that helps set things, especially if you're making a raw vegan sort of thing. And the dates are also helping it all stick together and set. So I'm going to use all of that stuff for the base, and then we're going to work on the filling after that. So I'll get my blender. I will have to mute you when we put it all in there. But I'll just go through like the substitutions you can make, basically because it's just a formula. So yeah, I always like to share about how you can use the science of a recipe is basically the formula of the components and how they stick together to make the right texture and flavor and that sort of thing. So because all we're really needing in this, we're not cooking it, it's just chilling and setting, is something sweet, something sticky, and something kind of crunchy. You can play around with it a lot. So I definitely urge you to experiment with it. You can play with some cheaper ingredients. You can play with what you've got in the cupboard. You can use any kind of nut or seed, really, especially like macadamias are really nice. Walnuts would be a stronger flavor, but pecans would be really, really nice. So pecans, macadamias, almonds, anything like that. You could add seeds in there, like pepitas or sunflower seeds. Yeah, or anything like that would be really nice. And yeah, depending on, you can change up the dates for the regular kind of dates if you need to. You could use dried apricots or dried figs, or yeah, even any other dried fruit, dried banana or dried pears, stuff like that. But the dates are the really sticky ones. Anything that's got a nice kind of bit more of a texture or flesh to it, you can use. Yeah. So first thing I'm going to do is actually just chuck a little bit of this coconut oil on the stove to warm up. If you have a microwave, if you have a microwave, I would say just use microwave. It's really easy. But otherwise, just pop something in a little pan and turn it on really, really low and warm it up. If you don't have such a giant jar, you can just plug the jar into hot water as well. But if it's, I just got this from the shop, so it's still solid, but usually in summer up in the Northern Rivers, it's not even solid by now. So you just need 1.5 tablespoons of coconut oil for this one. So I'm going to just put that in there. Okay. And we're not aiming to heat it up, we're just aiming to get it liquefied. So we're going to use 8 of these soft dates. So they've got pits in them. Just pull them out with your hands. And if you've got the not so soft dates, well, either way, a little bit of chopping up will just help the blender along. But if you've got the not so soft dates, then I definitely recommend popping them in the blender. Also with these dates, there's like a little top on them that is a bit hard. So you want to pull that out as well if you find that.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
So instead of the coconut oil, could you replace it with something like olive oil? Or is that too...
I wouldn't use olive oil for this one. Coconut oil is definitely my preference. The only thing I would replace it with if you couldn't use coconut oil would be cacao butter, which is a bit harder to get. That's sort of more of a specialty food. Like you could use a bit of macadamia oil or like maybe macadamia oil, but it's the setting part that we really want from the coconut oil. So because it sets cold, that's what we're actually looking for. So that's the most important part of it for this one. And when you're playing around with these raw vegan desserts, it's great to have coconut oil on hand because it just, yeah, it's great for helping cold things set in the fridge. So you can really get experimental with the fillings and stuff and yeah, use it as the kind of setting agent. So I'm going to, because I didn't get the little blanched slivered almonds, I'm going to just pulse my whole almonds a little bit first before I add the dates, because that's going to help break them up a bit quicker. So if you're doing the same with a whole nut, that's probably a good idea. Just give it a little blitz first before you add your sticky wet things, and that's going to help it meld together easily. So with the almonds, we're using 3/4 cup. And the other amazing thing about these recipes is because you're not baking it and you're not relying on like a combination of protein and sugar and fiber to get this certain texture that's going to cook in this way, it's really just about putting something together that is the right texture and it tastes good. Because we're not going through a whole nother process of it cooking and transforming into this other thing. So, you know, you can make it bigger, smaller, that sort of thing. You don't have to be very fussy about measurements, which is a great thing. So I'm going to put those in with my bit of coconut just to shred it up a little bit first. So we're doing 2/3 of a cup of coconut as well. And I'm going to give it a little blend. I'm going to mute you because it's going to be really loud. So I just gave that a little blitz so you can see it's nice and yeah, fine, but still with some little chunks. So you can pretty much take it to the texture that you want. It's nice to have those little chunks because it just adds texture. So nice little bits in there. And then just going to give these dates a little bit of a chop up so that the blender can handle them more easily. I'll pop those in and we'll pop the coconut oil in and then we'll have our base. And we go with the dates. We go with the coconut oil. We measured that. You could measure it again if you need to, but I measured it all right. And it's really good to have a bendy silicone spatula. So if you don't have one of those in your kitchen, buy one. You need it for everything. It's so handy. It's easier for cleaning bowls and getting in and around things. So definitely recommend that as like one of the key implements to have in the kitchen. I'm going to mute you again because it's be a bit loud. We're just going to blend it till it starts sticking together.
Just quickly, what are you studying, Kiri?
Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
what was that?
I'm studying early childhood / primary teaching.
Cool.
I just asked a question between you guys.
But yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I'd love to know what you're teaching as well, Caroline.
I'm not teaching. I'm studying forest science and management.
That's what I meant. I meant studying. I just heard what you said and then I was like, oh, cool. So that's now all sort of come together. It's all uniform. I pull some out with my hands to show you this. The main thing we're looking for is just that it sticks together. So you can press it into a little ball and it will stick. So this is the same base really for making bliss balls as well. So I don't know if you've ever heard of bliss balls before, but that's a kind of term for yummy, healthy ball of goodness. It's a really good, sweet treat, healthy treat as well. So you can basically use this same idea. You don't really need measurements, but the same base as a base for bliss balls. So you can add superfood powders into there like cacao and spices like cinnamon. You can do turmeric flavored ones. You can add vanilla, salt, all of that. I actually will add a little bit of salt to this because just a little pinch, because it tastes good to add a little bit of salt to sweet things, tiny little pinch, and other seeds and nuts and that sort of thing. So it's also a really good study snack. And then you would just grab the mix, roll it into little balls like that, you know, a bit bigger than that, and you can set them. They can be a little bit drier. That's a tiny one, but that's something that you can make, and you can like rub the outside with like seeds or something like that as a yummy, healthy little lunchbox snack or study snack. So yeah, that's all we're looking for, that it sticks together. We have to line the tin as well. So if you're using something that has sides and is not a spring form tray, then I definitely say to line the sides, like all of the sides, because it is not like a normal cake that it just comes out. I mean, you can always cut it out of the tin, but if you want to get it out and serve it nicely, then you want to be able to pull it out. I'm just using some coconut oil to stick the baking paper on. So that's my little trick to lining things, is just use whatever oil you're using in the cooking. It doesn't have to be butter. You can just use whatever oil, and that helps everything stick. I find the best way to get things to fit when you're lining trays is to just use your chopping board and a knife, measure out how you need it to sit inside. So rather than just putting it all in and then having it all sticking out in dodgy corners, we want to cut it to size so that we can have them slip in. So I'm going to cut it so that it fits inside. Long ways. I don't really know how to describe what I'm saying. So it can go in that way, and that fits perfectly on the base and comes up the sides and sits nice and flat, and we don't have any crinkles, so it's also going to look really nice when we turn it out. And then I'm also going to line the sides, the little edges, just so that it's really nice and neat and really easy to pull out, because we don't want to get stuck. So if you're doing this on a spring form tin, you don't need to cut the bottom into a circle. You just take the square and then you lift up the tin, oil the bottom, put the paper on and put the sides on, click it in. And if you're using a spring form tin for this, you don't really need to hit I just say line the sides. So oil the sides as well, and then just cut a rectangle off your paper, or two rectangles, long thin bits like that, and then oil them around the side. And same thing, use a little bit of oil on top of the paper to join the edges together. And then you'll get a really nice, neat finish on the outside edges as well. So that's going to give you that really special clean finish if you're like serving it and presenting it. And if you start getting creative with it and do different layers, you can do different fruits, make it different colored layers, then it's going to look really amazing. Tray's lined. What I'm going to do is pop that in and press it into the base. Gets a bit sticky down in the bottom of a blender. It can be easier in a food processor for the base, but I'm just going to get in there with my hands. And this might be a bit big for this size tray. It might make quite a thick base, but I'll just see how I go. And yeah, you can always just make multiple, because it's not going to be affected by cooking time like with the cake is, you know, that sort of thing. So up to you, really, up to you to play with. You can have it thicker, you can have it thinner. I'm going to give that a little rinse out. I'm going to also just do a little one in a glass. So you could do it in jars or little glasses, so that we'll have one set hopefully by the end of the lesson, because the whole thing probably won't be fully set by the end of the lesson. So that way we can just have a little look at the texture and that sort of thing. So I'm going to just press that into the bottom, and you can just use your hands, and you just want to press it so that it's really all sticking together and there's no gaps, and that's what makes it easier to pop out. I'm not going to aim to pop that out, we'll just eat it out of the glass, but that's also just to show you that when you have less time, or you wanted to make little individual things for a dinner party or something, that how adaptable this recipe is. So you can just do it in glasses as well. So that's good for that. Just getting it nice and uniform on the base. Getting it into all the corners. Flattening out the edges a bit. And yeah, like if you wanted to do a chocolate version of this cake, the only thing you're going to do differently is not put the lime in and add some cacao or cocoa powder. And you could add that in the base as well as the filling, or you could just do the nutty base and keep the filling chocolate. But basically what I'm trying to tell you is that you can do anything you want. And you don't really need to worry about measurements and that sort of thing too much. You can just play around with it. So that's all pressed in there now. Got our yummy sticky base. And now we're going to do the filling. But before I start with the filling, I'm just going to turn the oven on for the cookies that we're going to do next. So I'm going to put in the oven for those. I'm going to put that oven weight 180. Cool. Cool. So base there. I'm going to grab the blender again. And for the filling, we're going to use I just had my coconut cream in the fridge so that it would be a little bit colder too. Sorry, I've got my computer down here, so if I'm looking everywhere, that's what that is. So there's a little bit cooler so that it would chill down a bit quicker, but you don't need to do that if you're doing it in advance, so don't worry about that. We've got like a full cream, full fat coconut cream. Don't use the low fat because the whole point is that we want the fat because that's where the flavor and the texture comes from. Excuse me. The setting part and the creaminess of this cake, which isn't coming from dairy or real cheese or cream cheese or anything, is coming from the fat and the coconut cream. So if you buy one of the more watered down versions, they often are just a small amount of coconut and thickeners and stuff. So this is like 82% coconut extract. So you want to buy a good quality one, like the organic ones are usually good. Because some of them have a really low amount of coconut and it's not going to do the same sort of thing. So that would be my advice there. And then we're going to use the cashews that we have had soaking. So they've been just soaking in normal water and we're going to drain off all of that liquid. But yeah, if you were using, I said in there that you could use the AM brand coconut milk or coconut cream. They come in a little bit of a smaller tin. So if you're using that one, because that's like 100% coconut, it's really yummy. If you're using that one, then you just add the top to be like, add it to a total of 400 mils. I think they're like 360 or something. So you just add a little bit of extra liquid from the cashew if you're doing that. Yeah, so I'm just going to drain these off.
Samantha, why did you soak the cashews?
Good question. I'm getting to all of the cashew details in the next bit. So soaking the cashews, two things. One, like the reason for this is that it makes them really soft and yeah, creamy, that you can blend them and get them really, really, really creamy. And you can get them to a point where you don't have any of the graininess at all. If you've got a good blender, you can get it to be like completely liquid. And then when you're going through the texture of the cheesecake, it's like really like a cheesecake. If you didn't soak them and you just blended them with coconut, you're going to have kind of a more grainy, chunkier finish, and it's not going to set quite the same either. So that's really about plumping them up. They soak up all the water and then they become this kind of creamy and more easy to transform into a paste with the blender. The other thing that is good about soaking nuts is that it makes them more digestible. So nuts and seeds and grains and legumes, they all have what are called phytates, which you can also call like they're anti-nutrients basically. So what phytates are is this little chemical component of the seed that stops the seed from just sprouting anytime. When water hits the seed, that breaks down that chemical, the phytate, and the seed gets the message to start growing. So basically it's holding back the nutrients that's within the seed from going in to do its thing and help the seed grow. So that does the same thing in our bodies when we don't soak and cook and prepare legumes, nuts, seeds, grains, flowers, all of that stuff. So that's why in teachings like Ayurveda and like the traditional cooking and sort of spiritual holistic modalities from like India and that region and Chinese medicine, all of these original cooking lineages use like soaking and do a lot of like long cooked foods and warm foods, and they all really prioritize and value preparing grains, seeds in these sorts of ways. You'd also find if you look at the way that most traditional Indigenous cultures have used seeds and grains and that sort of thing, they've always prepared it in some way, whether that was soaking or cooking or something like that. So it makes it more bioavailable. All of those nutrients that were sitting in there locked away before we soaked them, if we just then put that in the oven, they're still locked away. But if we soak them and then cook them, they're more available, and they're more available to our bellies when we digest them. So there's like a lot of science behind that any nut, seed, grain is going to be just a bit healthier for you if you soak it. So that means things like rice, legumes, nuts or seeds, if you're putting them in salads even, stuff like that, it can just make it a bit more easeful on digestion. And if you're doing rice, you would say soak it overnight in water and then drain it and then cook it. And the same with like lentils or dried beans versus getting one that's in the tin. It's a little bit more digestible.
Thank you.
That's okay. So I'm going to put those in there. So it's great to soak them overnight. You're just going to get them to be a bit more plump and a bit more, they'll go a bit more creamy. They're going to absorb a bit more water. I just went shopping this morning, so they've been soaking for like 6 hours. And the other thing is that you can ferment them by soaking them and leaving them out on the bench rather than leaving them in the fridge. And you want to be a bit careful about that if you're like up in the north, like northern rivers, if it's summer and it's really hot, because they can go funky pretty quickly. But you can just put them on the bench and leave them out, not more than 24 hours, like 12 hours is probably better for that. And it can start the fermentation process and actually make them a bit tangy. So it's for you if you're a bit more brave and adventurous. And it's great to use like a little bit of a starter. You can put a little bit of yogurt or something in there, but it does it on its own. So yeah, it's a little bit more like, whoa, I'm eating bacteria and they're doing their thing. If you're into fermentation, then I, have a look up at the different ways you can do that, but you pretty much just leaving them on the bench overnight, and the lactobacillus bacteria are starting to do their thing to eat the sweet things in the nuts and make it a bit tangy. So when you're making a raw cheesecake, that naturally gives it some of that tangy flavor that is actually coming from the same bacteria that they'd be using for like yogurt. and cheese and that sort of thing. So it gives it that real cheesy sort of flavour. Whereas if you're just doing it this way, you don't quite get that. And that's why I like to bring some lime juice or lemon juice for that kind of tang. So yeah, that's another little layer that if you're game, you can play with. So we're going to use the whole tin of, so we've soaked 1 1/3 cup of cashews in water, and it's about 200 grams. We're going to use the whole tin of coconut cream. The spatula is like too big to fit in the tin. So yeah, your tin does not need to be cold. You can see that when you use the full fat coconut cream, when it's cold, it's pretty much like it's set, most of it. It separates a little bit, but it's set. So that's also what's going to be helping our whole cake to set as well. So I'm going to add some lemon to flavour mine rather than lime. So basically, if you just use the base of the cashews and the coconut milk, and then a little bit of the sweetener, I'm using a sugar-free maple sweetener. It's pretty expensive, but it's really yummy. You can totally just use maple syrup. You can use honey if you want, if you've got that. You could use like a coconut sugar. Won't blend quite as easily, but any sweetener option you want to use, you can use. You can use real sugar, like use it. But yeah, it's just really versatile for any of those. But maple is a really good option, or the sugar-free maple option. So we only need, what is it? 2 tablespoons of maple syrup. So that's not a lot of sweetener for a cake, right? Because we're using cashews, which are naturally a little bit sweet, like they're a sweeter nut. The coconut cream, even though I don't think of it as sweet, it is a little bit sweet. And we've got the dates in the base. So that's enough sweetness. We actually don't need more than that. And I'm going to use a microplane, which is a really cool, little kitchen option. See, it's got the really tiny thin blades. It's pretty much for citrus zest and Parmesan cheese and maybe like nutmeg, ginger, garlic you can use as well. It's really handy. It's way better than trying to use the tiny sides of the grater. And it's, yeah, really good for zest. So if you're into salads as well, I'd recommend it because lemon zest in a salad is super good. And when you're using a microplane, if you are using a microplane, you're not going to like grate it on there if you're doing zest, or if you were doing a grater, because you're going to go through to the white pith of the citrus. And that's bitter. It's not the yummy one. You just want the tiniest coating of the outside. It's going to be too close to zoom. And so to do that, you're just going to like do one go over each piece and then move it. So if you were doing zest for, yeah, cake or anything, that's like a good thing to keep in mind because you're going to get all the yummy flavour without that bitterness. I'm just going to do most of this lemon because it's going to taste really good. Obviously, like coconut and lime is just a really good time. So yeah, definitely recommend lime. If you were going to put mango on the top, definitely use lime because lime and coconut and mango is just like such a good time for summer. So I think to me, that's really Christmassy. Like it's not traditional Christmassy, but in Australia, that to me feels Christmassy because that's when we have mangoes around. So yeah, I like to just celebrate whatever fruit is in season and yeah, that way. So I'm going to put my zest in. I'm going to add a little bit of juice as well. You don't need to, but I want a little bit of tang in mine. If you were going to make a chocolatey version, then you would add a bit of cacao powder. Raw cacao powder is really good for this. It's like, you know, a bit of superfood or whatever they like to call it. It's a bit, it can be activating, like it can kind of give you a buzz. So just be mindful of that. And it's got a different flavor to cocoa powder. Cocoa powder is roasted and ground. Cacao powder is raw and ground. That's the difference. The same plant, same tree. Cacao is really popular now these days, and the lettering is just one different. It's AO instead of OA. So a lot of people are using it thinking it's normal cocoa. It's not normal cocoa. It's still got these, it's got these more stimulating properties of the cacao bean. So just be mindful of that if you're having it at nighttime. It might give you a bit of a buzz, it keep you awake. And it doesn't have as strong of a chocolatey flavor. It's a bit more of a mild chocolatey flavor. So it's really good for these raw cakes. But if you're doing baking, you want to use cocoa really, because the raw properties, the alive properties of the raw cacao are going to be finished when it's in the oven anyway. And the normal cocoa powder has a stronger, more chocolatey flavor because it's been roasted and then ground that way. So yeah, just a little note on that. So you would just use a couple of tablespoons of cacao powder or cocoa, and maybe just a little bit of coconut oil to balance the dryness that you're gonna add, but it'll probably be fine as it is. And then you can add spices if you were doing the chocolatey flavors. If you didn't put citrus in, then you can do like cinnamon and that sort of thing. But basically just play around with it. You can use maca powder. Turmeric is one I really like. If you're into like turmeric lattes and a little bit different flavors like spices and alternate flavors in sweets, that's a really good one to play with. Turmeric and lime is great, and you put some more cinnamon and that sort of thing in there, and that goes really, really well with like the mango, passion fruit, that sort of thing too. So yeah. So we've got, I've got to turn my actual lights on as well. Ooh. It was light when we started, so I forgot about those. So we have got soaked cashews, coconut cream, some more of the shredded coconut. I'm going to put 1 cup of that in here. And I've got the lemon juice and the lemon zest and the maple syrup. So that's it. And I'm going to silence you again and pop it in the blender and blend it up.
So, how far into your degrees? Well, I kind of know Carolyn a bit. But yeah, Kiri, how far in your degree are you?
I'm just over halfway, but I've been studying for a long, long time. So
Okay.
yeah,
That's all right.
technically my 3rd year, but not really.
So that's all blended. You can see it's nice and thick, it's nice and smooth. It's still got like some of that gritty texture because we've got the coconut in there. You can also make it without the shredded coconut in there. And you also just want to taste it, because if you play with different flavorings and that sort of thing, the flavoring is going to change a little bit. And the whole thing that I was talking about is that it's really just about the texture, and you can play with the flavor as much as you like. So I'm going to add a little bit more maple to mine and a little bit more lemon juice as well. And I'm going to add some cinnamon to mine as well, actually. I'm going to put a little bit of spice in it.
Hey, Sam.
Yeah.
What if you don't know what flavors to add, but you know it needs something else?
Oh, yeah. So that's where it just comes to like practice.
Okay.
That's the whole thing about cooking, is that it's all based on having a palate. Like having, like, your palate is what helps you to taste what's good. And it just comes from practice and experience. And the only way of knowing if something needs more, like the only way, you know, I could teach you if you were here with me would be like, taste this. How does it taste? Okay, cool. Now taste it when I add some more salt. Now taste it when I add some more sweet. Now taste it when I add some more cinnamon. Then taste it. It's just like science, right? It's like controlling variables. So we're only going to get the result or the feedback when we change a variable, and then we taste it, we get the result, we get the feedback, and then we're like, oh, so when I add more salt, it does that. When I add more tang, it does that. But the way I like to think of it is you got kind of your core like flavor principles, really, like salty, sweet, tangy, you've got like spicy, and then kind of more like just fragrant, or like then you've got like spices, that sort of thing. But really like salty, bitter as well, but salty, tangy, and sweet are going to be the main things that give you the flavor. And the other thing is fat. So fat carries flavor. So if you're making a sauce or a dressing or something like that, you always need some fat in it. And, you know, same thing goes in desserts. So you pretty much just play around. And the beauty of something like this is that, you know, adding a little bit more lemon juice, a little bit more liquid, that will make it a little bit softer. But that's all it's going to do. Whereas adding cinnamon or a different spice, turmeric, whatever, it's not going to do anything to the texture. It's not going to mean it's not going to work or whatever. It's just going to change the flavor. So you can just always go a little bit first and then mix around, have a little taste. Do you like how it tastes? Is it a bit boring? Is it a bit bland? Like basically with this, because we're not cooking it, we're getting the taste of the finished product. Like it's going to be a different texture, but we can taste what it's going to taste like in the end by tasting it now. So it's just like if you're making a dip or a dressing or a sauce that's not getting cooked, you get to have a taste of that now. So you can just experiment. Start with little amounts, like, you know, a teaspoon, or like half a teaspoon or a quarter of a teaspoon, probably like a quarter of a teaspoon of spices. And you can just add a little bit and then have a little taste. And if you like a little bit more, you can go a little bit more. But yeah, it's just a matter of playing around with things, which is what I kind of love about cooking.
Yeah, cool. All right. It's good to know.
Awesome.
Sam,
Yeah.
is there a reason that you wouldn't taste with the base? Like if I'm making bliss balls or something like that, I would have to.
Yes, no, definitely taste everything. Like taste everything. Unless you're cooking raw meat, raw eggs you can still taste. Like everyone used to eat, you know, batter when you're little making cookies and cakes and whatever. Like it's totally fine to eat raw eggs unless they're like some really dodgy quality. You can get salmonella. Like I shouldn't say totally fine. There is a risk of salmonella and stuff when you're eating raw eggs, but you totally can. Some people put raw eggs in smoothies. But like other than that, you can taste everything as you go. When you're cooking things on the stove or braises or longer, slower cooked things or like a roast, you can't taste a roast. Like it's just a piece of raw meat. You know, if you're cooking a curry or something, tasting it at the start, it's not really going to do anything because it takes time for the flavor to develop. So when you're doing dressings and dips and cakes, it's going to give you a better indication, raw cakes especially. You can just taste as you go. You know, that bit, I didn't taste it in the end, but yeah, could have tasted that for sure. And then the same thing, you can add spices to that. You could be like, oh, it's a bit too sweet. I actually just want a bit more coconut in it and I want it a bit drier, you know, texture as well. So that's up to you too. Yeah. And yeah, taste everything. if you are cooking something that's longer and more slow cooking, then what you want to do is taste it like 10 minutes before you're going to serve it at least. I'm thinking things like soups or bolognese or stews, because you really want to season it and flavor it as you go. Like, you're so much better off putting some salt in at the end if it doesn't taste flavoursome enough, or if it's a bit more sauce, or if it's you need to add a bit more spices or olive oil or something. It's better to do that while it's cooking and develop the flavour while it's cooking, rather than like putting it on the table and then you have like, you know, say it's a curry. Curry is really bland on bland rice, and then you put salt on top. It doesn't do the same thing. You want to season. When I say season, I really just mean salt in other cooking, as you go, and you develop flavour as you go. So that's more on the cooking side of things. But I probably talked about that in one of the other videos. I'm just going to give that another little blend.
So Kiri, there's a SCU movie club on Facebook now if you want to join. And we'll be, we're in the process of voting for which day of the week and times and types of movies. So if you're interested.
Oh, I'll have a look. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to pour that in. Yeah, and for the flavor pairing question as well, like in terms of what flavors to use, you can use recipes, like other recipes for inspiration, and just see, you know, like if you're in the learning stage, just to see and learn about what flavors go together. You know, like, and you can think of traditional desserts and stuff that you have as well that, you know, aren't the healthy version, and be like, oh yeah, like caramel and chocolate and nuts go really to get well together, like Snickers. And you could do like a Snickers version where you put peanuts in the base, and the dates are kind of the caramelly flavor, and the peanuts give that kind of nuttiness. And then in the filling, you know, maybe you use some cinnamon spices and that sort of thing. Or you do the chocolate in the filling, something like that. Or if you're doing fruit, then you're like, yeah, cool, like key lime pie is a thing. It's coconut and lime. That goes really well together. So start with simple pairings, like 2 ingredients, 2 flavors. So also the recipe says to put some, well, it doesn't say vanilla, but you can put vanilla in there. That's another really good one. That's always good, really, in any sweet thing pretty much. But it's also not, you know, necessary, but if you've got it, chuck some in. The real beans or like one of the extracts is better than the essence, I find. And yeah, just pop that all in there. Well, that's right, I was going to leave a little bit out for this little one. So I'm just going to scoop that out so that we've got one to set in there. So you can see it's pretty thick already. And because it's got that coconut and the cashews that have soaked up that water, that's going to set once it's in the fridge or freezer. So that's the little one there. It's like yummy little layers. And if you want to put some fruit into the cake itself, then what you can do is pull like, well, you can blend like frozen fruit, like frozen mango or blueberries into the whole thing. Or you can pull out half and do like a layer. This is what looks really nice. And then leave like a third or a half in the blender, and then add a few blueberries or raspberries and blend them up. And you might want to add, if you're adding some fruit, you're just thinking about the balance. So the coconut oil helps it set. So just, yeah, chuck a little tablespoon of extra coconut oil in if you're going to add some fruit, and then that will still set even though it's got the fruit in there. And blend that up, get it smooth, and then you can do like multi-layers. And you can like swirl it through, or you can just pop it on top. If you want it to get like a really crispy fine line, then you would put this in the freezer to set first, let it get a bit firm, and then add your coloured fruit topping layer on top. And then you don't have to like decorate it, and it looks really nice. So yeah, that's another way you can play around with it. So that's ready to put in the fridge or freezer to set. I always just put it in the freezer because it's quicker, and if you're going to store it, then you would kind of want to store it in the freezer. Cool.
It looks so good, Sam.
Yay! Cool. So that's one thing done. And like, obviously I was talking a lot during that. If you were not, if you just had the recipe in front of you, it's really, really easy. It's literally a couple of things, blend, put it in, and then you're done. Okay. So, raw cake. Any other questions on the raw cake? Anyone have any ideas of how they would maybe play with the flavors if you were to make it?
Well, first of all, I just wanted to ask you, when you tap it, that's to get air bubbles out, is it?
Yeah, there's probably a lot of things I do without even thinking what I'm doing or why it is. But yeah, it's just an easy way to get it a bit smoother and air bubbles. Yeah. Kind of works with anything like liquidy like that. If you've got air bubbles, tap it and it comes to surface. Any other questions? Cool. All right. Next, we're going to do some cookies. So I've got my oven preheating to 180, and I didn't write down a cooking time, so I'm going to have to wing that and just tell you as we go. So these ones, so I did put some optional flavoring ideas there, and some topping ideas. Like I put in rose water as well as another really good option. If you want to go like a Middle Eastern flavor, you could use rose water and honey, or rose water and maple in the filling. Rose water you want to use really sparingly. Oh, I just realized rose water would be really good for my peaches. Peach chocolate, but that's okay. It's just really, really yummy flavor. And you can do, yeah, like lemon zest with that and honey, and it's amazing. You could do pistachios in the base or crumble some pistachios over the top, and, you know, drizzle it with like honey or a little syrup, like your peaches or strawberries. And that would just be amazing. Or rosewater and raspberries could work really well too. So you could put some fruit in there in the layer and add some rosewater to it. That would be an amazing flavor.
Where do you get rosewater from?
Like usually an Asian grocer or like Middle Eastern grocer, like a specialty, yeah, alternate grocer. You'd have no issues in Melbourne finding rosewater. Yeah. Cool. So for these cookies, I've just adapted a like peanut butter cookie recipe because it's a really easy vegan, gluten-free recipe that could easily be adapted to sugar-free as well, because it's only got a bit of sugar. You could use one of the alternate sugars, like there's one called Lecanto. It's the same brand as that, and it's a monk fruit sweetener. And I've done all the research on healthy sugar-free sweetener options. Stevia, because there's a lot that aren't healthy, like your original equals Splenda, that sort of thing. There's a lot of fake sweeteners that are not good for you because the body doesn't know how to process them. But there are some good options out there, like Lecanto, which is a monk fruit sweetener with an erythritol sugar. So, you know, you can do your own research, but I've done mine, and that's the best, healthiest option that I can find. So if you want to go sugar-free, then you can do that. And there's like no calories at all. And yeah, like if you're on a special diet and you want to look into how that might react to your diet specifically, you're still going to have sweet, you know, you're still going to be having a bit of a sweet craving sort of experience because you're getting it fixed, but you're not actually getting all the calories and all of that energy of sugar, which is quite energy dense. So yeah, But I'm just going to use coconut sugar because I'm not too fussed about that. Coconut sugar's got a really nice flavor, and the reason I'm using coconut and not just some normal sugar is just because it's less processed, less refined. It's more of the whole thing. And see all the color? If you just think of that as minerals and nutrient content, like when we get white sugar, it's processed, refined, all of this good stuff, which is also flavor, is taken out, but all the minerals and stuff's taken out. It's basically just down to the sugar molecules. So whereas when you get a coconut sugar, then you've just got more of those other minerals and stuff. So it's a good little replacement to do. We're going to use some flax meal, which is a really good source of fiber. It's good for digestion because it's, I don't know if it's soluble fiber or insoluble fiber, but it's mucilaginous. It soaks up water. So you'll see we're going to do what's called flax eggs, which is a vegan option. I'm not vegan. I just like to do vegan things because it's easy for everyone. And yeah, it's shiny yummy. But yeah, it soaks up the water and makes like an egg-like sort of consistency. So it's a great replacement for egg in a lot of recipes. You can use chia seeds instead if you've got them, and that'll do the same sort of thing. You could use an egg if you have actual eggs. Yeah, they're your kind of options for the binder. So when we talk about like, yeah, the science of it, that's like the binder. That's what the egg does. It binds things together. And it's protein. It helps with like rise as well. The sweetness in baking is for texture, obviously for flavor, but it's also for texture. So if you're making a recipe that's got like 2 cups of sugar and you're like, that's just too much, I'm just doing 1 cup of sugar, that's fine, but it will affect the texture of the original recipe. So with brownies, it uses a lot of sugar because it's giving you that chewy, sticky texture. And it's the same sort of thing with cookies. You know, sometimes you can be like, yeah, I don't care, I'm just going to take the sugar out, reduce it a lot, and then you're going to end up with a dry, shitty cake. So I'm just swearing, sorry. So that's just something to be mindful of. And that's why, rather than, if you want to lower your sugar content or whatever, rather than finding a normal recipe and just dropping the sugar, you want to look for a recipe that's thought of that, because basically the other components are balancing that out to make the right texture. So with this, it's because we're using peanut butter rather than like any sort of flour, that it's not going to be dry without heaps of sugar. So that's basically the idea here. It's like higher protein. That's going to give the texture of the chewiness and the fattiness, without like drying things out like a flour would. So when using a flour, you naturally need more sugar because that's what balances out the dryness, so that you get like a fluffy, chewy, moist texture basically. So that's a bit on the science side of baking. Baking really is more of a science than, you know, cooking, like just savory cooking. So yeah, I feel like it's a better one to use recipes with because there's more that can go wrong. And there's more that can go wrong when you're subbing out things because of what I was talking about, like things actually chemically doing different jobs. You know, you also have like the rising component, which comes from the eggs. It comes from the egg replacements. It comes from like the baking powder. Whereas when you're just cooking like a soup or something, you know, you can put it in and, you know, it's not going to go totally wrong. You just like, taste it or something. So yeah, that's a little bit on that. So we've got peanut butter. I'm using the Woolies Organics. I don't know if it's just Coles on the school thing. I just got a smooth one because I wanted them to be kind of more smooth, like a normal Christmas cookie. And you could use chunky if you want. You could use the one from like the health food store if you want. You're just going to get a different result. It's going to be like more gritty, more textured. So yeah, that might change things. And what else do we have in here? We're going to get the baking soda, loose baking powder. When they say baking soda, they actually mean bicarb soda. Or I have that too. I'm just going to use what they told me to use. No. Let's get confused with this. We use baking powder. I wrote soda there. They're both going to do pretty much the same thing. It's okay. And we've got powdered ginger. You can add other spices too. I think we're going to add some like cardamom and cinnamon as well, and just make spicy cookies. Ooh. Here. And yeah. So the other thing I was going to say about these cookies is I think actually I should try it first. I think you could sub the peanut butter for tahini, and you can sub the peanut butter definitely for other nut butters, so almond, cashew, whatever. And they might, you know, depending on your health needs or whatever, some other butters might be healthier or whatever. But yeah, tahini also works well for this cookie recipe. So give that a go and see how you go. So we need a cup of this creamy peanut butter, smooth peanut butter. I'm going to measure that in here. It's so nice and porous. It's not going to be like that if you get the like health food store one as much if it's chunky. So I like that. I think one of these jars is like pretty spot on a cup. But yeah, the reason why it works so well with the nut butter, why almond meal is good for this sort of stuff too, is because it's high in protein. So we've got 1 cup, add that to your bowl. And we use the natural one because the peanut butters that aren't the specifically labeled natural ones usually have like a vegetable oil added to them. And vegetable oils are really one of the worst things we can kind of consume for our health. Like if there was going to be one health change you were going to make with your diet, it's really the quality of fats that you eat. So there's a whole conversation to have on like saturated fat versus non-saturated fat. Saturated fat is not bad. It just depends on the type of fat. So what we really want to think about is just reducing the refined vegetable oils, because basically our body doesn't know what to do with them. A lot of them are what's called a hydrogenated oil, so they're heat extracted with a lot of heat, a lot of pressure. They go through all these different refining processes. Our body doesn't know what to do with it. It's also out of whack with the balance of omega-3s and omega-6s that the body needs for natural health. It's really connected to our like immune system and the inflammatory markers and the inflammatory response of our body. So when we want to have like an omega-3 to omega-6 ratio, that's about a third of omega-3s to 3 to 1. It's like a third omega-3s to 2 parts omega-6s, but 3 to 1 is the kind of ratio that you want to look at. You know, a lot of things like canola oil, sunflower oil, that sort of thing. You might see on the labels like high in omega-6s. That's not a good thing. That's just one of the like marketing things of the refined, food industry, the oil industry, because like they want to sell it, but actually that's not a good thing. Omega-6s are good, but if we get that balance out of whack and we've got like 10 to 1 and our omega-3s are low, then we're going to have a difference in the inflammatory response in our body. So if you've got any sort of health stuff, looking at your oils is like a really good start. Doctors probably won't tell you this unless you go to like even a lot of probably standard dietitians, not even necessarily, but if you go to naturopaths or integrated holistic doctors, they'll talk to you about the quality of oils. And especially cooking oils as well. So the heat point of what oils you're cooking with. So that's something to think about too. So that's why I don't use the normal sorts of peanut butters. I'm going to leave that in there. I'm going to add half a teaspoon. I'm gonna add a teaspoon of ginger. And I'm making this up. I'm gonna add 3/4 of a teaspoon of ginger. And I'm gonna tell you how that goes because I'm experimenting. And I'm gonna add.
Would that also be a taste thing too with the ginger?
Yeah. But you're not gonna, it's because it's cooked, it's gonna be a bit, a dried spice isn't gonna taste the same when we just taste it raw like that versus when it comes out of the oven. So
dried spices, are they more potent than the actual grated ginger or the grated garlic?
Yeah, dried ginger is.
So does that go with all of them?
Sorry?
So is that a thing that all dried spices are?
Well, a lot of the spices we don't even get fresh. But with say turmeric or ginger, yes, they are more kind of potent in their dried form because the water's been extracted basically and then they've been ground down. So in Chinese medicine, they say that ginger is a warming food. It helps like activate digestion and stimulate digestive fire and juices flowing. And they say that actually the dried version is more warming than just the fresh raw version.
Okay.
So yeah, that's what I'm gonna add. And in another separate little thing, we're going to make up a flax egg, they call it. So we need a tablespoon of flax seeds. And so each one of these is like the equivalent of an egg, they say. So a tablespoon of ground flax. My little spoon is a bit dirty because I have it in the coconut cream. So I'm just gonna wipe that off. And then we're gonna add to it 3 tablespoons of water. So it's 1 flax, 3 water. And we're adding it separately because it does some magic with the binding of things. So by soaking it up like that, it just, starts to soak and come together. And we'll see before we add it that we want to like stir it together. And then we'll see that it kind of gets thick and a bit gelatinous before we add it into the mix. We're going to add the coconut sugar now as well while we're waiting for that to do its thing. And we're going to add 1/4 cup of coconut sugar plus 2 tablespoons. So I'm just going to go a bit over 1/4 cup. Cool. I swear that would make it like a third, but I don't know. I'm going to add that in. And we're going to put some baking powder in there. So it is 3/4 of a teaspoon of baking powder. Got a couple of chunky bits. I'm just breaking them up with fingers. If you've got big chunks, then it's probably a good idea to just pop your baking powder through a sieve. I could have done that if I was paying a bit more attention, but that's fine. Just crunched them up. And we're also going to add a little bit of salt. When you're baking, might seem counterintuitive, but a bit of salt in sweet things actually brings the sweetness through more. And if you think of, things like Snickers or something, there's like kind of that salty, element to the peanuts that goes really well. So especially anything with chocolate or peanuts or nuts, a little bit of salt just like really lifts it. So a bit of salt, good quality salt is the go. sea salt. Yeah, and a little bit of salt if you're making like a chocolatey bliss ball, it's like amazing. So 1/4 of a teaspoon of salt in there. And we'll just have a little check up on our little flax egg. Sort of starting to thicken a bit. You'll see that now, like, it's kind of all come together and it's like a thick, drippy substance. It's not just like watery with solids, like bits floating in it. It's actually like changed the texture. Whereas if you just had like nuts or something like that, it wouldn't do that. You see that it's kind of starts to go a bit gelatinous. So you can pop that in there. Oh, it says to set it for 15 minutes. Well, that's all good. But you could do that at the start, and then it'll just be a little bit more combined before we start going. So mix all that together. Ooh, smells gingery. And you also want to have like a lined baking tray. I've got a silicone sheet on mine, so I'll show you that in a minute, but it's really handy because I don't have to line it when I'm doing things like cookies. So you'll see that it's quite a wet mix for a cookie dough. It's not like a full dough. That's because we're not using like a traditional flour. But as you mix it together, it gets, you know, surprisingly drier once that's all kind of combining. So I don't know if you can see that yet. So pretty amazing for not having any flour in it, right? Like we didn't actually add anything dry, but that's the kind of science of things for you. Once you add like a liquid and a binder and protein to something that's mainly fat and protein, it starts to dry up and actually bind together. Cool, so that's all formed into like a nice little kind of dough. And that's just literally 2 tablespoons, so it's so easy. And I'm going to bring my baking sheet over here. Pop these out of the way. So this is what I call the Silpat. It's a silicone baking mat. You can pretty much get them around these days or at special cooking shops. But if you want to make cookies, it's the go. Or like roasting vegetables and stuff, and you don't have to line it and yeah, use baking paper over and over. So like you could totally mix things into this. If you didn't want plain ginger cookies, you could not put spices and they could just be peanut butter cookies. But you could, yeah, you can, yeah, there's vanilla in the recipe. I don't have any vanilla today, so I'm not putting it in there. So that'll be totally fine. And yeah, you could use other spices. You could do tahini and do cardamom. That would be like, and cinnamon would be like a real nice Middle Eastern sort of cookie. And yeah, you could add chocolate chunks. Obviously, that would be amazing. Or some like chunky pecans or something like that as well. So I'm gonna just make some like little balls. Roll them up with my hands. And pop them on. And give them a little squish. And I'm gonna keep them quite nice and fat. Like thick, I mean, they're kind of like maybe just under 1 centimeter, mine. And you could play with, yeah, as well, what sort of size and thickness you like for texture. It'll just change the baking time. and just make sure you leave some room at the edges because they're a more moist cookie dough. They will probably spread out a little bit. Does anyone have Christmas plans yet? Seeing as we were thinking about Christmas when we made this, the idea for this video. Nope.
No, we're doing something different this year. We're not going out again. So my son wants to do to have Chinese food on Christmas Day, and
Oh, cool. Yeah, I love that. Change it up.
Yeah. They've never, my kids never, he's an adult, but my kids never liked Christmas food.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm not really a Christmas food, like traditional Christmas food kind of person. I just see it as like an excuse to make an awesome banquet of all the things that I like cooking. But for me, that's like just food, like yummy veggie food. Maybe I'll just spend a bit more on if I want to have seafood or meat, but like not, you know, to me, Christmas isn't about like roasts in my head.
Well, it's too hot in this country anyway, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
Just myself.
Yeah, totally. So if you're a salady lover, I wonder if you know the chef Yotam Ottolenghi.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, he does some wonderful things.
Yeah, he's amazing.
But as a student, my budget is so small, so
Totally, it's
really
so hard.
those fancy salads.
Yeah. Yeah, that's my only issue with those sorts of cookbooks is that they're like, you know, yeah, really amazing ingredients, and that's why they're so amazing. They're such amazing salads. But for a budget at home, it's a bit unrealistic to get all those things. So the way I cook is usually less focused on the, you know, what specific ingredients it has to be, and more on the like technique that you're going to use to make it kind of taste good and buy whatever's like affordable and available. So yeah, but the good thing is that you can use those recipes as inspiration too, and you know, just see it as a formula and like, okay, there's roast veggies of this kind, but I'm going to sub it up for this kind.
Yeah, one of my favorite dishes is they're not, I don't roast them, but I think a lot of people do, as I just cut up yellow and red capsicums.
Yep.
And an onion and garlic and fry that off.
Yeah.
Like a
so
good. Love that.
Like seriously, most vegetables just fried in a little olive oil and salt. Delicious. Like everyone's like, oh, how do you make this so good? It's like just pan fried in some olive oil and salt. Pretty much everything is really good if you do that.
I love lentils a lot too.
Yeah, they're really nice in salads as well. I got like one little tiny one left over at the end. I could probably take some off the other chunky ones, but that's okay. So I got 16 yummy chunky cookies. I'm going to put them in. I'm just going to press some sunflower seeds into one of them just to like have a little play and see how they come out. I've seen when people do tahini versions of this cookie that they can roll the little balls and then cover them in the sesame seeds and then flatten them. So that looks like a really cool way to do it as
well. Do you think there would be like a firm enough dough to cut out shapes with?
Yeah, I reckon. Well, whoops. Yeah, like it came together quite nicely like that. You know, it might be a bit harder than with traditional flour dough because you don't have it fully binding, but if you were doing that. Oh, I should have done a little trial of that. Maybe. Let's see what happens. Let's do it. I'll just let the other ones keep cooking. I'm glad you asked that because I was curious about that too. I will put one in here and we'll like roll it out a little bit more and see what happens when we cut it. So I haven't tried that. And see what happens when it's a bit thinner as well. Because yeah, if you were rolling it, I would definitely say put it in between baking paper. And I would say to just use the baking paper like probably on a cabinet where you're going to cook it and then roll it. And if you're cutting shapes out, then just pull away the excess and then do another tray rather than trying to pull the cookies off and then put it over there, make it easier. So it rolls out really, really well. That's like quite thin. So let's see what happens if we try a thin one, like a cutter. I don't have any like actual cutter. I'm going to use my coffee cup and do a circle. And then pull the other bit away. Yeah, it's pretty good. But yeah, I'd probably not try to like move the bits that on the outskirts. So like I'd put it all on a piece of baking paper, roll it out, and then bake it on that. We'll do a test, so we'll see how it goes in the oven.
I'm thinking with like traditional like sugar cookies, you fill the dough before you roll them out to cut them, and it makes it easier to cut. So I'm wondering if they would act similarly. I don't know.
What did you say? Fill the dough, roll the dough,
put it in the fridge.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, you can try that. It rolls really easily. It's just a matter of how, I think if they were thicker and you cut them out, but also it'll be a matter of, I'm going to do that and then I'm going to do like, I don't have any shaped cutters. I'm going to just do some sort of like little shape, like a little love heart and do it a bit thicker and see how it holds its shape when it's cooked as well, or if it just walls everywhere. So it'll be our kind of little test off. Okay. Put that on here. So I've got one really thin one and one thicker with a shape, but they're just like on the baking paper, so that just makes it easy to put it on the tray. So if you did 2 layers of baking paper and just roll it out to whatever thickness, took the top layer off, cut out your things where they're going to be on the tray, and then pull the outskirts off, bundle it up, and then do your second tray with that, and you'll be able to work it out. You know, you just get smaller and smaller until you've got no dough left. So they're doing their thing. I'm going to clean up. I put those on for 13 minutes at 180, and I'm just going to see how they go after that. I'm going to get rid of this one. This one. Right. Let's have a look at this raw cake. Oh, no. heap of the raw cake. It's starting to set. You can see it's like not moving around heaps anymore. It's thickening, but it's in the freezer, so the top is a bit more set than underneath. So we're not going to attempt to try and pull that out for tonight's call. But we have this little one that's a little bit more set because it's smaller. So I'm going to have a little scoop out of that so we can have a look at how the texture is. It'll set up a little bit firmer in a little while too. But basically you can put it in glasses and have them sort of just set and be a bit of a softer sort of scoopable texture. Or you can freeze them, let them set in the fridge. If you set them in the fridge and they'll be spot on, you can use them straight away and cut it. Or, you know, if it's a few hours if it's a few days in advance and stuff, then pop it in the freezer, and then you want to just pull it out like 15 minutes, 20 minutes before you're going to serve it. And then it will be nice and cuttable. And then you can have it kind of more ice cream cakey as well. If you like that frozen creamy texture, then it can turn into a bit of like an ice cream cake, which is awesome. So I'm going to just serve these up with a little bit of peaches and basil, make a little bit of a syrup. Yeah, you can. So if you wanted to make a puree, I just I'm not going to make a puree for this one because I'm going to keep it kind of flexible so I can eat it with different flavors on different days, depending on what fruit I've got at home. But if you wanted to make something like a sauce to go with it, literally all you need is some frozen fruit, like frozen mango cheeks, or like raspberries or something, and some of whatever the sweetener that you've used, and you can put a little bit of coconut oil in whatever that is, and that just adds a little bit of body and thickness, and just blend it in the blender. You don't need to cook it. You don't need to do anything. And again, it's just down to flavor. So it's just something that's fruity and it's going to be liquidy when you blend it, and then just taste it, balance like sweetness, and does it need a bit of tang? Like if you're doing mango, you can put a little bit of lime juice in it, but really just like fruit blended, delicious. Using raspberries or blueberries, you might want to add like a little bit of sweetness to it. I'm just going to serve mine. I'm just going to do one up with fresh fruit because I really like the texture of fresh fruit more than like having a sauce with something like this. And I like making up little fruit sort of salads, I guess, that have cool flavors. And so that's why I wanted to show you that like peach and basil is a cool combo, because people probably don't usually think of using basil in a dessert, but it also goes really well with strawberries. And because even though the cake is like it's coconut, you wouldn't think of like coconut and basil, but when you think about flavor combos, like actually coconut and basil are both in Thai cooking. They actually, you know, do go together in something like certain types of curries and green curries and stuff like that. They use types of Thai basils and stuff like that. So there's a lot of places where you might not think that things go together, but they lend themselves really well to each other. And basil actually goes really, really well with strawberries as well. So something that you can play around with. I'm just going to cut them off into like little dice, fairly small, so you just get like little bites in each mouthful. Oh, that's what I can do. I can put the rose water in the fruit because I forgot to put it inside, so that'll be really yummy. So just going to pop that in a bowl. If I had honey, I could use some honey, but I'm just going to put a little bit of the maple on there so that it's got a bit of a sauciness to it, and a little bit of rose water. And when using rose water, always use the cap because it's really strong, and you just want to add like, you know, not even a quarter of a teaspoon, like a few drops at a time, like literally drops, and then taste it and add more. And you just want it to kind of faintly be there because it can be overpowering. It's literally just like distilled rose goodness. And I'm going to take a few of these little basil flowers. Flowers with the herbs are really tasty, actually. And a nice way to inject the flavor without like the full effect of the leaves. But I'm just going to pick like the little leaves because they look really cute. You can use any bit, but they're just here on this little bit, so I'm going to do that. Smaller ones, usually a bit younger, a bit more tender. And yeah, I'm just going to like tear the bigger ones in half rather than like shredding it up, because you're going to get more of the flavor, more constant if you cut it up smaller versus having, you know, like a piece of peach and then just getting like a little bite of basil. And you can kind of taste things a little bit more separately that way and get like a hit of this and a hit of that rather than it being all of this stuff in every mouthful, if that makes sense. And so you're like making a salad with fruit, and it's not just like, you know, boring stuff. It's like cool flavors, and it's just a really great way. That's why I want to show you that, because it's just a really great way of like adding really cool flavors that you don't have to like try in a baking recipe, or you know, if it was really bad, you've wasted one peach and some random stuff. But like it can't even be bad. But you know, you can experiment and start to have the experience of, what does this taste like? I'll put it in a bowl and have a taste, and it's just like, that's delicious. I'll probably put a bit like big bits of basil or a lot, and I'll put a little bit more maple in. That's awesome. I'm gonna have a little cookie, so it's beating at me. Awesome. They worked really well for the cutouts. So, oh, shut up. I'm just going to leave them to cool and try this for a little bit. And I'm going to chop that a little with a little bit of that fruit. And so if you're doing the whole cake, then I would pull the cake out of the tin first and then pop your fruit on. Cool. I'm going to put a little bit more. Oops. All right. So, go mini. Yeah. And I knew that was happening. My I've got two screens set up and my phone died. Hello, can you hear me right?
Pretty.
Yes. So I'm all about pretty things. You want like the colors and everything to just like pop. You know, the textures and the creaminess. So yeah, so I'll get a bit more of that off so I don't overflow things. I'm gonna have a little scoop out of that and see how the texture's right now. That's only been in there for a little while, so I'll just show you. Yeah, so that's not quite set yet, but you can see that, you know, if you're doing it in a hurry and you had someone coming over for dinner that night and you haven't thought of a dessert, you could do it in little glasses and it's still going to be yummy, and it doesn't matter so much if it's fully set. But yeah, so when you do this at home, unfortunately I couldn't do it all in this one go, but then you'll be able to pull it out of the tin and cut it into really nice little pieces. So I'm going to have a taste. Get a bit of the base in there. Yum. And it's really good with the peaches. Peaches and almonds.
Did you use a sweet basil?
Sorry?
Did you use a sweet basil or?
I just used like a normal basil that was at the market, which I think is more of a sweet basil. No, it's not like a Greek basil or something that's got more of that sharpness. Yum. That's so good.
It looks really good.
The only thing about Zoom cooking classes is I can't get you to taste it all. But that's the benefit of cooking along. But yeah, you get like really nice light flavor from this. Like it doesn't really taste coconutty to me. And it's just not heavy and dense and kind of sticky as like dairy stuff. And then the base has got that kind of awesome texture. It adds the sweetness. You got the sweetness from the fruit as well, and a bit of the tang from the fruit that balances it all out. So yeah, it's a goer. So let's have a look at these cookies. So they're still too hot, but you can see that they've moved out. They've grown a bit from when I popped them on. So
you tilt the camera down a bit?
Yeah. The phone angle. Different. The phone has a bit of a wider angle. So you can see they've come out really good. They hold their shape really well. I was just like putting them on and then pressing them, and I was testing to see like that they won't melt out. Basically, they hold their form really well wherever you put them. And with this one, I was a bit more careful to like tidy up the edges when I pressed it, and you can see it gets like a bit more of a nice neater edge. But they hold their form really well. I'm going to let them cool a little bit more, but they're just starting to be able to pick them up. Really nice kind of chewy texture cookie. And then so I think they would lend themselves really well to like Christmas style cookies, because I rolled that one out really thin on the paper, and you can see it held its shape perfectly with the cutout. And that's really nice and thin, and that cooked really quickly, probably like 8 minutes or something. And then the one that I did as a little love heart also held its shape really well. So you could totally use that recipe for, like the more traditional sugar cookies. And like that's picking up really well. I'm very tempted to snap it. I'm gonna do it. No, it's still warm, so it's still pliable. I should let it cool properly before I do that. But yeah, they're holding that shape really, really well. It's the broken heart. So yeah, I feel like I'm gonna pull one of those off there so that I have a little cooling rack, so that we can get that to cool down a little bit, and I can have a little go at showing you the texture before we jump off the call. That'll just speed that up being on the rack. But yeah, that's two little healthier versions, sweet treat options that you could do anytime. But yeah, especially the Christmas cookie, or the cookies being like able to be spiced up or that sort of thing, you could do them instead of the traditional cookie, and they hold their shape well for doing the cutouts. I wouldn't go making a gingerbread house out of them. You really want some gluten for that, I think, to build walls and stuff. But yeah, they'd be perfect for little cookies. And and the raw cake, which is super adaptable, super flexible. And yeah, if you're doing it in you could also do it in like a baking tray like that, the raw cake, do it thinner, and then you can pull the whole thing and cut it out into little squares, and then store it in your freezer for, if you want to have a healthier treat at night instead of buying ice cream or something. you can have that in there, and it's like delicious and healthy, and you can have it anytime. And you know, even though the ingredients themselves, like cashews and stuff, are expensive, actually, like we didn't use all that many of them. It was only like a cup of cashews, and we made that whole loaf tin of the dessert and a can of coconut cream. So, you know, once you cut it up into little bits, that would be a good sort of healthy treat option to have that you can pull out of the freezer. And another little tip, if you were going to do that and store it in the freezer, would be to cut out little squares of baking paper or whatever size, and you cut it up, use your knife, you wipe your knife as you go if it's like sticking, and then you pop it in your baking paper, and you can just pop that on the sides so that you can stack it into like one container if you don't want to like individually wrap it or whatever. So that's a really easy way to do it. You can just wrap them up in baking paper. Yeah. And you can do that for a party as well. If you wanted to do like a finger food, you could do it in a tray and then just cut little squares so everyone gets like one little bite. So that's what's so good about it, is just so adaptable.
That's great, Sam.
Yay. Anyone got any other questions?
How long would it last, like if it was just in the fridge?
I'd say like, depending how well it's wrapped, if it's in a container and sealed, like definitely 5 days to a week. Yeah, like 5 days is probably safe. Like I think it could go a week. Probably a week is fine. But yeah, if it's in the freezer, pretty much indefinitely. I mean, like, yeah, you could have it in there a couple of months, and it's not going to affect the texture too much. If you go longer than that, then it starts to can do funny things to the texture with freezer burn and stuff like that. But yeah. Cool. Yeah. So yeah, I would recommend setting it in the freezer and then just pulling it out like 15-20 minutes before you want to serve it. And you can use a hot knife if you need to, but yeah, like wipe the edges when you're cutting it is another sort of trick with raw cakes or any sort of cheesecake or anything like that. Like have a cloth, a wet cloth, cut. Like I don't usually, I'm like, oh, I won't say that thing, but I was at a friend's birthday party. No, it was a baby, I was gonna say a baby warming, a baby blessing. They called it a baby shower, baby blessing. And they had a raw cake there out of the picnic. So it had been out of the fridge a while, and they went to cut it. And they were like, because it was a bit, you know, moist and stuff sticking to the knife. And I was like, I've got the tricks. And they were like, oh my God, that's so good. And I was saying to them, like, I don't usually tell people that stuff because I don't want to be like, this is how you do it. But yeah, that's what I'm here to do tonight. So that's another little trick that can make things a bit easier. Yeah.
That's really handy to know.
Cool. Yeah, really good for cheesecakes or yeah, anything like that really. This is cool enough now that I'm going to have a little, it's still chewy. It's like firm enough that it sits as like, yeah, a cookie, but then it's still got like a bit of a chewiness to it. Yeah, like it's not super dry and crispy. Cool.
With the thicker cookies, will they like stay chewy like as they cool?
Yeah, they will be more of a chewy cookie. Yeah,
okay.
with the peanut butter, they've got more of that texture.
Yeah.
Yep. I don't like dry cookies. I like chewy cookies, so I chose one that was chewy. Yeah, I reckon it would be it would actually be really good as a raw cake base.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like even though that's not raw, who cares? But it would be really good as a raw cake base if you wanted to do like a whole different experience. Because it would have a cool texture, and yeah, I think that would be awesome. You could do it like an ice cream cake, or like a
ice cream sandwich.
Like an ice cream sandwich, exactly. Yeah. So you could totally do that with those. I would be into that, like baking it into the bottom and then having another one and freezing the center as a raw cake and topping them. It would be amazing.
friend make ice cream out of that coconut, a can of coconut cream.
Yeah, I've done it before. I pretty much just added like vanilla extract, because that's got a bit of alcohol in it, and sugar. I think I used coconut sugar, and a couple of caps of like brandy. Nice. Or spiced rum or something, but like brandy, yeah, something for a bit of alcohol, because again, in ice cream, the sugar crystals is what makes it not crystallize. So you can pull back the sugar in an ice cream recipe, but you're going to get crystallization, which is, yeah, the kind of thing that makes it not so creamy. So yeah, it's a cool option. Like, it works pretty well. I've done it. You just have to blend it. You don't have to cook an ice cream base. You just put it in the blender, whip it up, and then churn it. It's pretty good.
You could make like ice cream, like bananas.
Totally.
Oh, like set it like that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So I wish I could give you all a cookie, but I can't.
Well, I think it's a good sign that you're enjoying the cookie.
I'm enjoying the cookie, yeah. I'm like, totally nibble.
You always wonder when I'm watching MasterChef, because especially the old one with the 3 guys, sometimes they looked like they didn't like it, but they said they loved it, and I just never trusted them.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, totally. I just feel like my phone was in my pocket, but it's not. No, I'm gonna enjoy having them for little treats for this week. And they're really nice texture. I think I'd be really into having them with like seeds in them, like pepitas and some, yeah, like little seeds or sesames. I think sesame tahini version would be really good. So I'm going to try that next time for sure.
Yeah, I'm going to try it with tahini. Unfortunately, yeah. I'm allergic to the peanuts and not almonds or anything else, just peanuts.
Okay.
But I looked it up, and I don't think the coconut sugar doesn't come from the actual coconut fruit, so I may be able to use that.
Yeah, you don't have to use coconut sugar. You can also use, they call it panela sugar, or it's just cane sugar, but it's unrefined, so it's also still better for you. It's got a nice flavor and texture to it as well. You can use normal sugar, it's fine. But if you want to try the raw cake and you can't have coconut and you can't have, so you could use tahini or almond butter in the cookies. The cookies don't have any coconut oil, so you'd be fine with those. Then if you wanted to try the raw cake, it's the same, but you just would have to play around a little bit more. And so you could buy some cacao butter, and it's got that chocolatey flavor, which is cool. It's kind of like white chocolatey, but without all the sweetness, and just use a little bit of you could totally get away with not putting any oil in the base. It would be fine if you had the dates and the nuts. But you could put a little bit of the cacao butter, just use the dates and the nuts, press that in. And then when you do your creamy mixture, you would soak your cashews. You'd use more cashews, like maybe double it, because you've got the whole tin of coconut cream texture that you're not going to have. Maybe double it, soak your cashews, and then keep your water, drain it off and keep the water to the side. And then you could play with I can't give you any amounts, but you'd basically just want to blend the cashews with as much water that you've soaked it in as you need to get it to start blending comfortably. That's all. So start with none or less, and then you just add it, kind of like if you're making a sauce or whatever, or a dip, to get it to hummusy texture where it's smooth and doing its thing. And then just add like a 1/4 cup of melted cacao butter. And as long as you just don't add too much water back in during that process, if it's thick and creamy and like not runny, like pouring off the spoon, but like a dollopy texture, while it's in there. And then you add a little bit of another solid fat, like cacao butter, then you'll be able to get the same result that would pull out of the tin and be cuttable.
Excellent.
Yeah, so I actually really love doing it that way too, with cacao butter. It's a more of a flavor, but it's yummy.
Okay.
And if you were doing a chocolate version one, then it would fit perfectly because you've got that chocolate flavor.
Did say no to chocolate.
Sam, I might get you to say like a little ending and then I'll end the recording.
Okay, cool. Yeah, thanks everyone. I'm Samantha Josephine. If you want to check out my food Instagram, it's not super active right now because I'm focusing on my non-foodie things, but my foodie Instagram is at Cooked and Cultured. On Instagram, cooked and and cultured. And yeah, you can find me on my other Instagram where I do a lot of other stuff, but more coaching and holistic mental health sort of work as well, at Samantha Josephine Wise, W-I-S-E on Instagram. So just the full name. But yeah, there's a couple there you can check out. So thanks everybody. I hope you get cooking and have a really healthy, safe and free Christmas this year. Let's hope we don't have any more COVID situations.